Hi everyone. This week we have watched and are now thinking a little bit about Waltz with Bashir. I hope that everyone found it really interesting, even if, at least in my opinion, this is one of the most depressing and upsetting movies out there. And part of the reason it's so depressing for me, and I'll come back to this in a little bit, is because it is animated. It uses animation for a particular reason and gets a particular kind of power out of it. So even though it is an incredibly upsetting representation of the Lebanon War, and that took place during 1982, I hope that you found it interesting as a film and as a way of structuring experience. So for my comment on Waltz with Bashir, I want to focus on two things. The first is that this movie introduces us to one of the main themes of the course, and it's going to be memory and time. We will come back to this as we look at later movies, and it's going to be a theme that is incredibly relevant for not just the films that we are talking about, but for films overall. Films and television shows are really, really interested in general in how the mind works. Now, in this movie, we have Folman. Now, it is based off of the director himself. This is actually a real story based off of the director's own experiences as a 19-year-old in the Lebanon War in 1982. Now, Folman is trying to piece together his own experiences. So we watch him interact with many individuals, a psychologist, and many other individuals who he knew from the war. And he is trying to figure out what happens. He doesn't remember very much at the beginning of the film about the Lebanon War or about the massacre of Beirut that he witnessed. So this entire movie is about him trying to piece together his own experiences and his own memory. And he starts basically from nowhere. He remembers very, very little. And as we go throughout the film, in talking to individuals he knew during the war, as well as just reliving the experiences in some way, the memories come back to him. So he is someone who is suffering from pretty severe PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder, and he's gradually coming to terms not just with the memories, but with what he did and what he witnessed. As he pieces things together, he needs to try to figure out how to move forward as a human being who may have engaged in incredibly horrible actions or at various points witnessed those horrible actions being done by others. One of the conversations that I want us to really think about, and you can bring it up in the discussion board if you want, is a conversation that happens about 9 minutes into the movie. The conversation revolves around Folman, the main character, and one of his friends who is a psychologist. And the psychologist walks through this whole explanation about how memory works. You remember, he talks about an experiment when people were shown an array of a few photographs. All of them were real photographs, and then one was created. A person was basically photoshopped into a scene. And they tried to figure out if individuals could identify if they were all real. The vast majority of them said no, their minds created a memory for them based off of the fake photograph. And the psychologist says that, and this is the quote, memory is dynamic, it's alive. Now, that's an idea that the movie's really interested in, and later movies that we watch will be interested in as well. That it's not like the memory just captures all of the things that happen to us. That's not the case, at least according to this movie. According to this movie and according to the psychologist, memory is constantly changing. If I think about something that happened to me yesterday, if I think about it a week from now, that may be different than how I remember it 2 weeks from now, or a year from now, or 10 years from now. My mind is constantly revisiting that experience and thinking about it in different ways. Our minds are not cameras, right? They have subjective experience built into them, and that experience can actually change how we understand things. Now, the movie is going to come back to the idea as the main character pieces his memory and pieces, in some ways, his identity together. All right, the second thing I want to talk about is animation. One of the reasons I picked this film is because of just how different it is from Wall-E and many of the other Pixar films that are incredibly popular. I think that sometimes we fall into a trap when we think about animation. We create a really neat category around it, right? We think that animation does this. Animation is for children's stories. Animation is for stories that have a main lesson behind them. All right, so even like a moral, fairy tales are often animated for that reason. Now, one of the things that one of the lessons we can take away from Waltz with Bashir is that is not true. Animation has a wide variety of results and effects. One of the reasons that Waltz with Bashir, for me, is so powerful as a story about war and politics and what it means to be human when you're watching so many things inhumane happening, one of the reasons it's so powerful is because it is animated. If this movie was a live-action film, I actually think in some ways it would have lost its point. It would have lost its potency, its power. So there's a huge disconnect for me between how the story is told, so through animation and music that is often catchy or beautiful. There's a disconnect between that on the one hand and what is being represented. It becomes such a depressing movie because we watch individuals being killed, massacred. We watch buildings being blown up as individuals are partying and as everything is being animated, which creates a certain kind of distance. One of the things that we can think about in terms of animation is the moments in the film that are not animated. All right, now, if you got to the end of the film, you'll notice that about an hour and 20 minutes in, it switches to real life footage. So it shows the women going back to their homes and just seeing the results of the massacre and of the bombing. All right, you have that raw footage, and then you also have the pictures. These are so different from the animated film, but they're describing the exact or showing the exact same scenes. So the fact that Fulman, the director, uses animation is part of the point. I think that this movie shows that animation can have all different kinds of forms and all different kinds of results. And it can be incredibly depressing when there's a disconnect between the animation itself and what is being depicted. All right, so that's all I really wanted to say in terms of the film. I really look forward to seeing your ideas in the discussion.